Her cry echoed across the street, and the rancher's next move stopped the town cold. Children ran freely across the lanes, calling to each other in high-pitched laughter, and neighbors often leaned over fences to exchange the latest news. Life moved slowly here, in a rhythm that felt predictable and safe. People prided themselves on this sense of calm. Yet in that calm, a tension quietly simmered, like the heat before a storm. At the edge of town, near the last row of houses that bordered open fields, lived a young woman named Clara. She had long, chestnut hair that fell in gentle waves across her shoulders, and a pair of curious green eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Clara was known in town for her kindness and her willingness to help others. If a neighbor was in need, she was the first to offer a hand. If someone felt lonely, she would sit and talk with them until they felt better. People admired her, not just for her looks or her helpfulness, but for the calm and gentle presence she carried with her. That afternoon, the sun was bright, casting a golden glow over the town. Clara was outside, finishing her daily chores. She swept the porch of her small house, her movements precise and rhythmic, and then moved to tend to the small vegetable garden behind her home. The tomatoes were turning red, the carrots were peeking out from the soil, and the smell of fresh earth mixed with the gentle scent of wildflowers that grew along the fence. Everything seemed peaceful. Birds sang overhead, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree in the front yard. Clara's thoughts wandered as she worked. She thought about her family and the upcoming harvest festival, where she would help prepare the food and decorations. Life had its challenges, but she had learned to find joy in the little things: the smell of fresh bread, the laughter of children, the warmth of a neighbor's smile. She hummed softly to herself, lost in these quiet thoughts, enjoying the simple beauty of the afternoon. Suddenly that calm was shattered. A sound, sharp and full of panic, cut through the air, a cry so desperate and full of fear that it made the heart skip a beat. Clara froze, her broom mid-sweep. Her eyes widened as she realized the cry had come from across the street, from one of the houses where an elderly woman lived alone. The sound echoed in the narrow street, bouncing off the wooden walls of the houses and reaching every corner of the town. People stopped what they were doing. Children paused mid-play. Shopkeepers looked up from their counters. Even the horses in the stables seemed to sense that something was wrong, their ears twitching nervously. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She dropped the broom and ran toward the source of the sound. Her legs moved quickly across the dusty road, and her mind raced with questions. What had happened? Was someone hurt? Who was calling for help in such a terrified way? She reached the front of the house, and the sight that met her eyes made her stop in her tracks. The elderly woman, Mrs. Holloway, was standing at her doorway, trembling violently. Her face was pale, and her hands clutched the frame of the door as if it could hold her up against the fear that gripped her. "Mrs. Holloway," Clara called out, her voice calm but urgent. "What's wrong? Are you hurt, Mrs.?" Holloway shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her cheeks. She could barely speak, and when she finally did, her voice was a whisper of panic. Someone tried to take my money, my things. They were in my house." The words sent a shiver down Clara's spine. A robbery in Willow Creek was rare. The town was small, quiet, and safe, or at least it had been until now. Clara could feel the tension rising around her. People were beginning to gather in small clusters across the street, their whispers mixing with the sounds of the breeze and the faint creak of the wooden doors and shutters. Curiosity, fear, and concern rippled through the crowd. Some faces were pale, some anxious, some shocked, and a few showed anger at the thought that someone could violate the peace of their town. Clara took a deep breath and stepped closer to Mrs. Holloway. She placed a gentle hand on the older woman's shoulder, trying to ground her and bring a sense of calm. "It's all right," Clara said softly. "We'll figure this out. You're safe now. Tell me everything slowly, Mrs." Holloway began to speak, her voice still trembling but gaining strength as she recounted the events. She explained how, earlier that afternoon, she had noticed shadows moving near her house. At first, she thought it was just the trees swaying in the wind. But then she saw a figure trying to open her back door. She had screamed, and that was the cry that had echoed across the street, summoning anyone nearby to help. Clara listened carefully, her mind forming a picture of what might have happened. Across the street, the crowd grew. People were now whispering loudly, some pointing toward the ranches and the open fields beyond the town. There were murmurs about strangers, about thieves, about danger lurking in the quiet town. Fear was beginning to spread, but so was determination. Willow Creek was small, and its people were proud. They did not like the idea that their town could be violated, that someone could strike fear into the heart of their community. Amid the growing concern, one figure emerged from the crowd. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm presence that seemed to command attention without effort. This was James, the local rancher. Known for his steady hands and quick thinking, he had a reputation for solving problems before they grew out of control. He walked steadily toward Clara and Mrs. Holloway, his eyes scanning the street and the surrounding fields. His face was serious but not panicked. In fact, his calmness seemed to calm others, even as whispers of fear continued to spread. "Everyone step back," James said in a deep, clear voice that carried across the street. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Clara, Mrs. Holloway, are you both all right?" Clara nodded, though her hand still shook slightly. "Yes, thanks to you, James." "But something definitely happened. Someone tried to break in. We need to know who and why." James studied the street, the houses, and the distant hills. "We will," he said calmly. "First, we make sure everyone is safe. Then we figure out what we're dealing with. No one panics in my town while I'm here." His confidence seemed to settle the growing anxiety in the crowd. People nodded and began to move back, giving space while still watching intently. Clara looked at James with a mixture of relief and admiration. In that moment, she realized that his presence was more than just comforting. It was a promise that someone capable and courageous was taking control. The fear that had gripped the street slowly began to ease, replaced by a sense of cautious hope. As the sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty street, Clara felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. She knew that whatever had caused her cry to echo across the town was just the beginning. Something had shifted in Willow Creek, something that would change the town forever. And at the center of it all, she sensed, was James, the rancher whose next move could either save them all or reveal dangers no one had imagined. The townsfolk returned to their homes, but their eyes kept drifting toward the Holloway house and the looming hills beyond. Whispers carried through the streets, but Clara stayed by Mrs. Holloway's side, holding her hand and promising that everything would be all right. She didn't yet know how it would unfold, but for the first time, she understood that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about facing fear with calm, steady determination. And as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky above Willow Creek, the quiet town felt a tension that would not be easily forgotten. Clara's cry had echoed across the street, and with it, the story of that day had begun. A story of fear, courage, and the people who would rise when their town needed them most. After the frightening cry that had echoed across the street, the small town of Willow Creek was in a state of quiet tension. People spoke in hushed tones as they went about their routines. Mothers called their children back from the streets, shopkeepers glanced nervously at the emptying roads, and even the animals seemed uneasy, sensing the change in the air. Clara stayed by Mrs. Holloway's side, trying to calm her and make sense of what had happened. Yet, despite her efforts, a gnawing worry lingered in her heart. She couldn't shake the thought that the danger might not be over. Across the street, a small crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and concern. They whispered among themselves, sharing their own theories. Some suggested it was simply a misunderstanding. Perhaps a stray animal had frightened Mrs. Halloway. Others imagined more sinister possibilities, fearing that strangers had come into their peaceful town with bad intentions. Every whispered theory seemed to make the air heavier, and Clara could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. Meanwhile, James, the rancher, quietly assessed the situation. Unlike the townsfolk, he didn't rush to conclusions or allow fear to cloud his judgment. He was known for his calm and logical thinking, a trait that had earned him respect across Willow Creek. He studied the street carefully, noting the positions of the houses, the nearby alleyways, and the open fields beyond the town. His sharp eyes picked up details that others overlooked: footprints in the dust, a fence slightly ajar, and small marks on the wooden door of Mrs. Halloway's home. Each clue told a story, one that suggested that someone had indeed trespassed, but perhaps not with the intention of causing serious harm. James spoke to Clara in a steady voice, meant to reassure both her and the onlookers. "Clara, don't worry. I need you to stay here with Mrs. Halloway. I'm going to take a closer look and find out exactly what happened." Clara nodded, her hands trembling slightly, but she trusted James. His calm presence gave her strength, and even though fear still lingered, she felt safer knowing he was taking control. As James moved closer to the edge of town, the murmurs of the crowd followed him. He examined the area surrounding Mrs. Halloway's home, his eyes scanning for signs of disturbance. The footprints in the dust were small, and it seemed the intruder had moved carefully, as if trying not to be noticed. James knelt down to inspect them more closely. He recognized the pattern. These were not the tracks of a skilled thief, but someone inexperienced, someone who had been caught in the act and frightened by Mrs. Halloway's scream. The townsfolk watched from a distance, whispering nervously. Some of them felt a surge of admiration for James, while others still felt fear. The idea that someone had come into their town without permission was unsettling, but seeing James take action reminded them that they were not helpless. One by one, a few of the braver townspeople began to approach, offering to help him if needed. James waved them off gently, knowing that too many people could make the situation more chaotic. "Stay calm," he said. "I can handle this. If I need help, I'll call for it." As James followed the trail of footprints toward the outskirts of town, he noticed movement in the distance. Shadows shifted near the old abandoned barn at the edge of the fields. His heart did not race with fear, but he felt a focused determination. This was not the first time he had faced danger, and he knew that caution and careful observation were the keys to resolving it safely. He crept closer, his eyes scanning every detail. The sunlight was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the open fields, making the shapes of the barn and surrounding trees more mysterious and ominous. From the crowd in town, Clara watched anxiously. She could see James moving with purpose, and she hoped that he would be able to handle whatever threat had come so close to their homes. Her thoughts were a mixture of fear and admiration. She had always known James was a strong and capable man, but seeing him take charge in a moment of crisis made her realize just how important his presence was to the town. Inside the old barn, James discovered signs that someone had been there recently. Dust was disturbed on the floor, and several crates had been moved. It was clear that the intruder had been looking for something valuable, though it wasn't clear exactly what. James examined the area carefully, noting the scattered hay, the marks on the wooden walls, and the footprints leading back toward town. He could tell that the person or people responsible were nervous and inexperienced, likely scared off by Mrs. Halloway's scream. Back in town, whispers grew louder. People speculated about who the intruder might be and what they wanted. Some suggested it could be a group of strangers passing through, while others feared it might be someone they knew, someone from nearby towns trying to take advantage of Willow Creek's peaceful nature. Clara listened to the conversations, feeling her anxiety rise. She wished she could know the full story, but she also knew that she had to trust James. After a careful search, James returned to the street, his expression calm but determined. He had gathered enough information to understand the situation, but he knew that the next steps were crucial. He addressed the townspeople, his voice firm but reassuring. "We know what happened," he said. "Someone came into town trying to take what didn't belong to them. They were scared off before they could do any real harm, but we cannot let this go unnoticed. We must remain alert and protect our town." The crowd listened attentively, feeling a mixture of relief and admiration. They realized that, although the intruder had not succeeded, their town had faced a real threat. James's presence and leadership had prevented a disaster, and they were grateful for his intervention. Clara felt a sense of pride and relief, knowing that someone capable was watching over their community. As evening approached, James walked back to Mrs. Holloway's house, making sure that the area was secure. He spoke with Clara privately, explaining what he had found. "The person who came here was inexperienced," he said. "They didn't know what they were doing, but that doesn't mean we should be careless. We need to make sure the town is safe and that this doesn't happen again." Clara nodded, understanding the importance of vigilance. That night, Willow Creek was quieter than usual. The streets were empty and the houses were closed up for the night. Yet, the sense of unease lingered. People spoke in hushed tones about what had happened, but they also spoke of James, the rancher who had acted decisively, preventing harm and showing courage in a moment of fear. Clara sat by her window, looking out at the stars and reflecting on the day's events. She felt a mixture of fear, admiration, and curiosity. Something had changed in Willow Creek, and she knew that the coming days would be important. Over the next few hours, James made rounds through the town, checking doors, gates, and fences. He spoke with neighbors, offering reassurance and advice on how to stay alert. His calm demeanor helped ease the tension, and by midnight, the town began to feel a sense of normalcy returning. Yet in the back of everyone's minds, there was a quiet understanding that this event had changed Willow Creek. They realized that even in a peaceful town, danger could come unexpectedly, and that courage, quick thinking, and community mattered more than ever. Clara finally went to bed that night, her mind full of thoughts. She thought about the intruder, about Mrs. Holloway, and about James. She realized that the world was not always as safe as she had believed, but she also understood the importance of having people who could act with courage and wisdom in times of crisis. The cry that had echoed across the street was a warning, a reminder that life could change in an instant. But it was also a moment that revealed strength, leadership, and the quiet heroism that existed in her town. And so, the town of Willow Creek slept that night with a new awareness. The danger had not come to fruition, thanks to James, but it had left its mark. The people knew that vigilance was necessary, and Clara knew that the days ahead would bring both challenges and revelations. The quiet town had faced its first real test, and the events of that day would shape the community in ways they had yet to understand. The morning after the terrifying cry, Willow Creek slowly began to stir back to life. The sun rose over the dusty streets, casting a warm, golden glow over the town. Shops opened, children played cautiously in the lanes, and the scent of fresh bread and coffee drifted from the bakery down the main street. Yet beneath the routine of daily life, a quiet tension lingered. Everyone remembered the sound that had echoed across the street, the fear in Mrs. Holloway's eyes, and the way James had stepped in with calm authority. No one spoke openly about it, but the sense of unease remained, as if the town knew that the incident was only the beginning. Clara, too, felt the lingering tension. She had spent a restless night thinking about the previous day, the cry, the shadows, the footprints, and most of all, James. There was something about the way he moved, the way he seemed to understand the situation without panic, that both comforted and intrigued her. She wondered how he always knew what to do, even when others were scared or unsure. As she walked down the street toward the small market to pick up a few supplies, she noticed people exchanging glances, whispering behind hands, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. The town was alert, cautious, and curious all at once. Meanwhile, James had already begun his investigation. He left his ranch early that morning, walking quietly along the edges of town, inspecting the streets, alleyways, and the fields beyond. He had a notebook in hand, jotting down observations, drawing sketches of the footprints, and noting possible entry points for anyone attempting to sneak into the town. To James, every detail mattered. A bent fence post could mean someone had climbed over, a broken branch could mark a hiding place, and even the disturbed dust on a rooftop could tell him about movement in the night. His mind worked quickly, connecting pieces of the puzzle, forming a picture that was still incomplete but growing clearer with every observation. James's first stop was Mrs. Holloway's house. He wanted to reassure her that her home was safe and to gather more details about what she had seen. Clara was already there, helping the elderly woman with simple chores, trying to keep her distracted from the lingering fear. James approached with a calm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Holloway," he said gently. "I've come to check on you and make sure everything is secure." Mrs. Holloway's hands trembled slightly as she held onto the doorway. "Thank you, James," she said softly. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." "I can't stop thinking about it." James nodded, listening carefully as she recounted every detail again. "Did you see anything unusual yesterday? Anyone lurking around before the cry?" he asked. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. "It all happened so quickly. I thought I saw a shadow by the back door, then I heard footsteps, and before I could do anything, I screamed." Her eyes welled up with tears, and Clara gently squeezed her hand. James considered her words thoughtfully. "Thank you for telling me. That helps a lot. The person who caused this is likely inexperienced, probably scared off when you screamed. But that doesn't mean they won't try again. We need to be careful." Clara watched him closely. There was a confidence in James that went beyond physical strength. He had a sharp mind, a keen sense of observation, and a way of staying calm under pressure that inspired trust. She realized that the town depended on him in ways that went beyond his role as a rancher. He was a protector, a leader, and now, the one who would uncover the truth behind the incident. After ensuring Mrs. Holloway was safe, James moved on to the outskirts of town, where the fields stretched toward the hills. He followed the trail of footprints he had seen the previous day, taking careful note of every detail. The path led him past the abandoned barn, the old oak grove, and finally to a small creek that ran through the fields. James knelt by the creek, examining the prints in the soft, damp soil. He realized that whoever had come through here was not familiar with the terrain. The footprints were uneven, some slipping into the mud, some crushing twigs and leaves. Whoever it was, they had been nervous, fearful, and untrained. As he studied the footprints, James heard a rustle in the bushes nearby. His hand instinctively went to the pocket where he kept a small, sturdy stick, not for violence, but for protection if needed. Slowly, carefully, he approached the sound. A small animal, a fox, darted out of the underbrush and disappeared into the fields. James exhaled slowly. Even small surprises like this could startle an inexperienced intruder, and it reminded him of how easily fear could take control. Meanwhile, back in town, Clara was busy spreading the word that everyone should be vigilant. She helped neighbors secure doors and gates, making sure windows were locked, and advised the children to stay close to their families. Her calm demeanor, combined with James's earlier presence, gave the townspeople a sense of reassurance. Yet even as she worked, Clara felt a flicker of worry. She knew that whoever had caused Mrs. Holloway's fear was still out there, and she hoped James would find them before anything worse could happen. By late morning, James had gathered enough clues to form a basic plan. He had mapped out the possible routes the intruder could take if they returned, noted areas where the town was vulnerable, and considered who could help him if action became necessary. He returned to the street, where a small crowd had gathered, curious and anxious. "Listen carefully," James said, addressing the townspeople. His voice was calm but firm, carrying across the quiet street. "We know that someone entered town yesterday, trying to take what didn't belong to them. They didn't succeed thanks to Mrs. Holloway's quick thinking, but we can't ignore the possibility that they might try again. I will be checking the outskirts and patrolling the area. I need a few of you to help me watch for anything unusual, but no one should confront anyone alone. Safety comes first." Several townspeople stepped forward, volunteering to help. Some were younger men who had grown up with James, familiar with his methods and trusted by him. Others were shopkeepers and neighbors, ready to do what they could to protect their homes and families. James coordinated their efforts carefully, assigning shifts and locations, making sure that every vulnerable area was monitored. The town was coming together, not in fear, but in careful preparation. Clara stayed close to Mrs. Holloway, but she also watched James as he gave instructions. She noticed the way he listened to each person, adjusting plans based on their experience and abilities. He didn't just take charge, he guided, taught, and reassured. The townspeople followed his lead, inspired by his courage and confidence. Clara felt a sense of admiration grow within her. She had seen bravery before, but this was different. It was calm, thoughtful, and unwavering. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, James set off toward the fields again, accompanied by two trusted townsmen. They moved quietly, scanning for signs of intruders and checking the areas James had identified as vulnerable. Every rustle of leaves, every movement in the shadows made them alert. Hours passed, and the sun began its slow descent. They found signs that someone had indeed been in the fields again: broken twigs, disturbed soil, and faint footprints. Whoever it was had returned cautiously, testing the area, but had clearly noticed that they were being watched. By the time they returned to town, the townspeople were gathered near the main street, eager for any news. James explained what they had discovered. The intruder was likely inexperienced, still nervous and cautious. He emphasized that the town should remain vigilant but not panic. "We are ready," he said. "We have the information, we have the people, and we have the courage to act if necessary. No one in Willow Creek will be taken by surprise again." Clara listened, her heart swelling with respect and relief. She realized that the town's safety depended not just on bravery, but on preparation, observation, and teamwork. James had shown them that courage wasn't just about facing danger. It was about thinking, planning, and leading. The people of Willow Creek now understood that they were not helpless, and that their community could stand together in the face of fear. As evening approached, the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the town and the fields beyond. James made one final round, checking doors, gates, and fences, and spoke with anyone who had questions or concerns. By the time night fell, the town felt a cautious sense of security. The danger had not yet fully revealed itself, but thanks to James's actions, the town was ready. Clara watched from her porch, reflecting on the day. She felt a mixture of anticipation and curiosity. She knew that the events of the coming days would be critical, and that whatever happened next would test not only James but the entire town. And so, the story of Willow Creek continued. The town had faced its first real threat, and while fear still lingered, courage, preparation, and unity were beginning to shape the way forward. Clara understood that the mystery was far from over, and that James's next move would be crucial in protecting their home and community. The quiet town had awakened to a new reality, one that promised challenges, revelations, and the chance to witness bravery at its finest. The next morning, Willow Creek woke under a blanket of quiet anticipation. The sun rose slowly, painting the dusty streets in a soft golden hue, but the air felt different, heavier, charged with tension. Everyone remembered the previous day's events, and though life seemed to move on, a nervous energy lingered in the town. The children were quieter, mothers glanced more frequently at doors and windows, and shopkeepers kept a wary eye on the streets. The memory of Clara's terrified cry and Mrs. Halloway's panic had left a mark. No one had forgotten. Clara was up early, helping Mrs. Halloway tidy the house and ensure that doors and windows were secure. Even as she worked, her mind wandered to James. He had left at dawn, determined to uncover the truth behind the mysterious intruder. Clara felt a mixture of worry and admiration for him. She had seen his calm, commanding presence in action, but she also knew that he faced real danger when dealing with unknown threats. Despite the fear, she trusted him implicitly, knowing he would do everything possible to protect the town. James moved quietly along the outskirts of Willow Creek, accompanied by two trusted townsmen, Thomas and Eli. The trio had walked the perimeter of the town, checking fences, gates, and open fields for signs of intrusion. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound, made them alert. The footprints they had discovered the previous day led them toward the old barn at the edge of the fields, where shadows and broken timbers hinted that someone had recently passed through. James studied the area carefully, noting the broken boards, the crushed grass, and small marks in the mud. Each clue added to the picture he was forming. "Someone's been through here again," James said quietly, kneeling to inspect fresh footprints. "See how scattered they are." They're nervous, inexperienced. They're testing the town, trying to figure out how far they can go without being noticed. Thomas frowned. "Do you think they'll come back to the houses, to Mrs. Halloway?" James shook his head. "Not today, I think. They're cautious. They know someone's watching now, but they might return soon, trying another way. We need to be ready." Clara, back in town, kept busy making sure neighbors were secure. She spoke with anyone willing to listen about keeping watch, locking doors, and staying alert. The townspeople looked to her and to James as sources of reassurance. Clara herself felt the weight of responsibility, but also the thrill of being part of the community's defense. She knew the intruder's attempts could continue, but the preparation and vigilance of the town would make a difference. By midday, James had devised a plan. He would follow the intruder's tracks through the fields while ensuring that other townsmen kept watch over the streets. His goal was not confrontation for its own sake, but to ensure safety, catch the intruder off guard, and prevent harm. The plan required patience, careful observation, and timing. James's calm demeanor inspired confidence in Thomas and Eli, and they followed his instructions precisely, scanning the surrounding fields and listening for any sign of movement. Hours passed, and the sun climbed high in the sky, warming the fields. Suddenly, a faint movement caught James's eye near the barn. He signaled Thomas and Eli to be quiet and crouched low in the tall grass. There, partially hidden by the shadows of the barn, were two figures. They were young, clearly inexperienced and clearly nervous. They moved hesitantly, as if unsure of what to do next. James studied them carefully. Their hands clutched a small sack, likely taken from one of the town's outskirts. "They're inexperienced," James whispered to Thomas and Eli. "They don't know how to handle this. They're scared, and that's our advantage. We need to stay calm, not rush, and guide this safely to an end." The intruders were unaware that James and his companions were watching. Their eyes darted nervously toward the fields and the town, calculating risks, but unable to fully grasp that someone was tracking them. James slowly approached, using the tall grass and shadows for cover. He wanted to confront them without provoking panic or unnecessary violence. He had no desire to hurt anyone, but he needed to ensure the town's safety. Clara, unaware of the exact location of the intruders, stayed near Mrs. Holloway's house, helping neighbors and watching the street. Her thoughts kept drifting to James. She hoped he would succeed, knowing that his experience, calmness, and intelligence made him capable of handling the situation. Still, her heart raced with worry, imagining the possible dangers he faced. Finally, James closed the distance to the barn. He stepped out from behind a stack of old crates, his hands raised slightly, showing that he came in peace but with authority. "Stop right there," he called firmly, his voice carrying across the empty field. The intruders froze, their eyes wide with fear. They dropped the sack they had been carrying, stepping back as they realized they had been discovered. James kept his voice steady and calm. "You don't need to run. Nobody here wants to hurt you, but you need to come with me. There's been enough fear caused already." The young intruders looked at each other, uncertainty and panic written across their faces. They had not expected to be confronted directly, and the sudden presence of someone confident and in control left them frozen. James took a careful step closer, maintaining calm, deliberate movements. "This doesn't have to get worse," he said gently. "You made a mistake, but you can fix it by being honest and cooperative." Thomas and Eli moved in slowly, flanking James, to ensure that the intruders could not escape into the fields. The young people began to realize that resistance was futile, and slowly, hesitantly, they nodded. Their shoulders slumped as the fear and tension began to lift slightly. James's calm, strategic approach had prevented panic, avoided violence, and brought the situation under control. Once the intruders were safely guided back toward the town, James spoke to them in a firm but understanding tone. "You've caused fear, yes. But there's a better way to handle mistakes. You need to return what you took and apologize to those you frightened. This town looks out for each other, and we want to keep it safe, not escalate conflicts unnecessarily." Clara, seeing James and the intruders return from a distance, felt a wave of relief wash over her. She saw the young intruders carrying the small sack back to the Holloway house, and she realized that the situation was being resolved peacefully. Her admiration for James grew, understanding the careful balance of courage, patience, and intelligence he had demonstrated. When they reached the town, Mrs. Holloway and the neighbors gathered to witness the return of the intruders and the items they had taken. There were murmurs of surprise, relief, and respect. The intruders looked nervous, embarrassed, but unharmed. James addressed the crowd. "This is how we handle mistakes," he said calmly. "With courage, with thought, and with fairness. No one was hurt and the lesson is learned. We protect our town and we protect each other without unnecessary harm." Clara felt a deep sense of relief and pride. The town had faced a real threat, and James's decisive, careful actions had ensured that it ended safely. The intruders, guided and corrected rather than punished harshly, had learned an important lesson about respect, honesty, and the strength of community. The streets of Willow Creek, once filled with whispers of fear, were now filled with quiet gratitude and admiration. As the sun began to set, painting the town in shades of orange and pink, Clara walked beside James, helping him make sure everything was secure. The town had returned to a cautious normalcy, but the events of the day had left a lasting impact. People understood that courage was not only about facing danger, it was about thinking clearly, acting wisely, and protecting the community. James had shown them that true strength combined calmness, intelligence, and a sense of fairness. That evening, Willow Creek felt a sense of peace, but it was a peace earned through vigilance and action. Clara reflected on the events, realizing that fear could bring people together, that courage could inspire respect, and that leadership was as much about wisdom as it was about bravery. The town had survived its first real test, and the lessons of the day would remain with them forever. As stars began to twinkle above the quiet streets, Clara looked out over the town, thinking about what had happened and what lay ahead. The cry that had echoed across the street had set in motion a chain of events that revealed the strength, courage, and wisdom of the people of Willow Creek. And at the center of it all was James, the rancher whose calm and decisive actions had protected them all. The day after the confrontation, Willow Creek was alive with a sense of quiet reflection. The sun rose slowly, spilling warm light across the dusty streets, but the town felt different now. The fear that had gripped everyone the previous day had given way to relief, gratitude, and admiration. Clara walked through the streets, greeting neighbors and noticing the subtle changes in their expressions. There was a newfound respect in the way people looked at each other, a sense that they had shared something significant together. The town had faced a real threat and survived, and that survival was not just by chance. It was because of careful thinking, courage, and the actions of one man. Clara made her way to Mrs. Holloway's house first. The elderly woman was sitting on her porch, sipping tea, and looking out over the street with a calm, peaceful expression. She smiled warmly when she saw Clara approaching. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Holloway said softly. "I can finally relax a little. Thanks to James and thanks to you as well. You stayed by my side and that helped more than you know." Clara returned the smile, feeling a sense of pride and satisfaction. "I'm glad you're feeling better," she said. "Yesterday was frightening, but it taught all of us something important. We can face challenges if we work together and stay calm." Mrs. Holloway nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Yes, and we have James to thank for showing us how courage can be wise, not reckless. He protected us, and he showed us how to protect each other." The story of the intruders spread quickly throughout Willow Creek. By mid-morning, neighbors and townsfolk were gathering in small groups, sharing their perspectives and retelling the events of the previous day. There were laughs mixed with exclamations of relief, expressions of disbelief at how close the danger had come, and sincere admiration for James. People spoke of his calmness, his intelligence, and the careful way he had handled the situation. Children whispered to each other about the hero rancher who had stopped the town from being harmed, while adults reflected on the lessons learned. Clara wandered through the town, visiting familiar faces and checking on everyone. She noticed that the bonds between neighbors had strengthened. Where there had once been casual greetings and polite nods, now there were conversations filled with gratitude, trust, and shared concern. People had come together in a way they never had before, motivated by the events of the past day and the leadership of James. She realized that the town had changed, not in appearance but in spirit. James, meanwhile, was performing his usual morning rounds. He checked fences, gates, and the outskirts of the town once more, making sure everything was secure. Though the immediate threat had passed, he knew the importance of vigilance. The intruders had been inexperienced, but there could be others who might test the town's defenses. James also made it a point to speak with the young intruders themselves. He did not scold or punish them harshly. Instead, he guided them, helping them understand the consequences of their actions and encouraging them to take responsibility for their mistakes. By doing so, he demonstrated that leadership was not just about stopping danger, but about teaching, guiding, and creating understanding. Clara watched as James worked with the young intruders, and she felt a deep respect for him. She realized that true courage was not only about strength or bravery, but also about wisdom, patience, and compassion. James had shown that in abundance, and the entire town had benefited from it. She thought about the events that had unfolded, the cry that had echoed across the street, the tension, the careful observation, and the final confrontation, and she understood the importance of each moment. Each decision, each calm word, and each careful step had led to the safety of everyone in Willow Creek. By afternoon, the town had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The streets were filled with familiar sounds, children laughing, neighbors chatting, and shopkeepers attending to their customers. Yet beneath the everyday activity, there was a sense of pride and connection. The people of Willow Creek had faced fear together, and they had emerged stronger. Clara walked to the edge of the town to see the fields and the old barn where the confrontation had taken place. The area seemed quiet and peaceful, but she knew that the memory of the events would remain with her and the townspeople for a long time. Later, a small gathering formed near the town square. Neighbors came together to discuss the events, share lessons, and express gratitude. James addressed the crowd, his calm voice carrying across the street. "Yesterday, we faced a challenge," he said. "It tested our courage, our calm, and our ability to work together. I am proud of this town, proud of the way everyone stayed alert, and proud of the way we handled the situation without unnecessary harm. Remember, safety comes from awareness, preparation, and supporting each other." The townspeople nodded, their eyes reflecting respect and admiration. They understood that James's actions had not only protected them, but had also set an example of how to face fear wisely. Clara listened closely, inspired by his words, and felt a renewed sense of confidence in herself and her community. She realized that courage could be quiet and steady, not loud or reckless, and that leadership could guide people through challenges without causing panic or harm. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the streets and buildings, Clara walked home, reflecting on the events of the past days. She thought about the intruders, the town's reaction, and James's careful guidance. The experience had changed her, showing her the value of observation, patience, and calm decision-making. She knew that these lessons would stay with her for the rest of her life. That evening, a small group gathered outside Mrs. Holloway's house to celebrate the safety of the town and the bravery that had protected them. There was laughter, conversation, and a sense of shared relief. Even the young intruders were present, apologizing for the fear they had caused and promising to do better in the future. The townspeople forgave them, understanding that mistakes could be opportunities to learn, especially when handled with guidance and patience. Clara looked around at her neighbors, noticing the bonds that had formed. The events of the past days had brought people together in a way that simple routines and ordinary days never could. They had faced fear together, acted wisely, and emerged stronger as a community. Clara felt a warm sense of belonging, knowing that she was part of a town that cared for each other, that respected courage and wisdom, and that valued the safety and well-being of everyone. James joined the gathering, his calm presence offering reassurance. He spoke briefly to the townspeople, reminding them of the importance of vigilance, cooperation, and courage. His words were simple, but they carried weight, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who heard them. Clara realized that leadership was not about power or authority, but about guidance, protection, and the ability to inspire others to act with confidence and care. As night fell over Willow Creek, the town finally felt a sense of peace. The streets were quiet, the houses secure, and the people relaxed in their homes. Yet beneath the calm, there was a shared awareness of the lessons learned. They knew that challenges could arise at any moment, but they also knew that together, guided by courage, wisdom, and careful planning, they could face anything. Clara sat by her window, looking out at the quiet streets and the starlit sky. She thought about the cry that had echoed across the street, the fear it had caused, and the way James had handled the situation. She realized that true bravery was often quiet, thoughtful, and steady, and that real heroes inspired others not through force, but through guidance and example. The town had learned these lessons firsthand, and they would carry them into the future. As she drifted off to sleep, Clara felt a sense of gratitude and hope. Willow Creek had faced danger and emerged stronger. The cry that had once echoed across the street had set in motion a series of events that revealed the courage, wisdom, and unity of the community. And at the heart of it all was James, the rancher whose calm, decisive actions had stopped the town cold and shown them the true meaning of leadership. The night passed peacefully, and when morning came, the town was ready to continue its daily life, forever changed by the events that had tested them. Clara walked through the streets once more, greeting neighbors, sharing stories, and remembering the lessons learned. She understood that fear could be overcome with courage, that challenges could be met with preparation and calm, and that community could be strengthened in the face of adversity. Willow Creek was no longer just a quiet town. It was a town that had faced its fears, protected its own, and learned the true value of courage, wisdom, and togetherness.